got to number 3 because we had lots of debate about the first 3.
Okay.
So we'll take everything from Brendan's last 3 and we'll just include our first 3. So provide public goods. We believe there's enough, well, there's legislation or governing bodies that govern public goods, and the definition of public goods for me means that if I use a product, it's not depleted from the next person. So this is my definition of it. So basically we discussed fixed pricing on a basket of goods such as the brown bread, the milk, the rice, which helps everyone in our community to afford these products at least. And I think they're doing a good job, and they could be a bit better. On number 2, manage the economy. I think we came up with good regulations on factors such as imports, exports, or locally produced products. What we mean is the taxes or duties for goods leaving the country and entering the country. If they could be produced locally, the taxes of importing would be higher. And that kind of scenario. I would like someone else in my group to add something to that. Bianca? Was it to the demand and supply part?
Yes, it is. So,
anyway, so for us, the legislation governing the imports, exports, and locally produced documents is good legislation. Whether it's been enforced properly, that's debatable. And to take care of common resources, my understanding of common resources would be water, land, fish, ocean, stuff that everyone is accessible to. And we have problems with the water in South Africa, in definitely certain provinces. Whereas in Gauteng, we're extremely lucky. We have great water, thanks to the Rand Water Board. Land. Do they govern land? I don't think they govern it enough. I think they could govern it a little bit more, make sure it's accessible to all people in South Africa, and that it produces enough produce for all South Africans. Fish, I know we have legislation governing our fishing policies, XYZ, around the coast. I don't think it's enforced enough, seeing as they docked our Navy that used to enforce it, or the resource boats. So I don't think they're doing that well in that area. Overall, I think our government needs to play a bigger role in most of these.
Okay.
I think there's good legislation, and we've got good legislation for a lot of these things, but it's not being enforced correctly or not followed through to the end. So yes, we put legislation together, everyone agrees in Parliament, but there's no action taken after the fact.
Yeah. Except the e-tolls, that one won't be enforced.
But the only reason why that one's being enforced is because it's an international company that needs their money back.
Yeah. And you're squeezing out the middle.
They're going to have huge consequences. I don't have an e-tag. I refuse to get one. And how many people in this class have one?
No, I don't. I also don't.
I'm refusing to get one until they send me a bullet at my door, and then they can come arrest 500,000 people. Done. Good luck with that.
Yeah, it's quite
Anyway,
hectic.
that's a bit of my personal feelings.
Yeah, it is. But for a country to develop now, it needs a middle class. All developed countries, you see, they've invested heavily in having a stable middle class that keeps on growing. You know, so if you squeeze it out, then that gap now in terms of equity actually gets even bigger. You know, it gets even bigger because you'll see when you squeeze the middle class, the poor, in terms of dropping to the poor, it's actually higher than the numbers that would climb up to the rich, and that creates social problems. You know, then we can have service delivery processed at an accelerated pace. You know. I want to take you on your suggestions in terms of land. You say they could do much better to ensure that more South Africans have access to it. Shall they do it the same way?
No, I don't think they should do it the same way, but if someone, I don't think that's the right way to do anything. But if someone can cultivate land, and if you watched Carte Blanche a while ago, there were stories about where the government actually gave land to farmers. And all they did with the land is start selling it to people who wanted to squat. And actually those land didn't even belong to him, it belonged to some other farmer that wanted his land back. So for me there's a gap there. If you're going to give someone a piece of land, okay, and let them cultivate it, you need to manage that land. You need to say, okay, you have 6 months to plow and plant seeds or whatever the case is. You have another 6 months to show a harvest or whatever the case may be, however long it takes. And from that, govern those lands and give it back and take it away. If it's not working or it's not productive enough, they need to take it away and give it to another person to try.
Okay. You had something to say there.
Yes, I think we have to appreciate that the dawn of democracy in 1994 brought about hope in the country, in that we had the so-called willing buyer, willing seller, where the intention of the government was to transfer the ownership of land from the minority to the black majority of this particular country. But it has since been proven over the past 20 years that that policy doesn't work at all, in that the government set itself a target of 30% of land to be transferred by 2014 to the black majority. And to date, only 8% has been transferred. I think to the extent that there was that political willingness from the government, that needs to be appreciated. But I think the negative part of that is that I personally don't think that the government is doing much, in that they have now shifted posts, moving, the 2014 target to 2030. And it doesn't in fact seem that even come 2030, that 30% of land will have been transferred to the black majority. In fact, my rough calculations tell me that for every 5 years, only 2% of land gets transferred to the black majority. Then it means that it will take us approximately 8 years to transfer only that 80% portion. So on that part, I think we should all of us agree that willing buyer, willing seller will not go, because it means that somebody who owns land must first be willing to sell before we can actually move it as the government. And I don't think that will actually work. Look, in terms of mineral resources, we know that the situation changed after '94, in that the government, I would say, expropriated the right of ownership of the minerals, in that the mining sector is expected to apply for licensing, and obviously they have to work according to the book or the license. So the question is, why can't it be the same with the issue of land? We give you, the right, to access land on condition of your license. In the situation where, you falter the license, then the government should have a right, to claim back or expropriate that particular land. So I think that's where the issue of land and minerals goes. I don't think that the government is doing, much, even on the beneficiation as well. Yeah. We know that South Africa, in terms of platinum, we are the biggest producer globally, you see. But we are always, just simply producing that, exporting that raw material as is. And you go to those, areas, for instance, the Marikana situation. For me, I think if we were doing much on beneficiation, we'll have dealt with the issue of those shanties or shacks that are actually there, you know. So I honestly don't think that we are really doing much in relation to beneficiation, being it, I mean, gold, being it diamond, or being it platinum. But I think generally that's where the problem is, even in the in some of the provinces of the country. I'll make an example. I'm from Free State in a way. Free State, we know that in terms of agriculture is the brass bread basket of the country, but we are not processing. We are not adding value to what we are actually producing in the Free State. In fact, that gets produced processed in your Gauteng province, you know, and that doesn't address the actual problem of unemployment in the Free State. So
unemployment in Free State could be higher.
Is in fact higher than
than this 25% that we talk about nationally.
Exactly. That's basically the situation.
Which is the same argument we had with inflation yesterday, that the inflation rate applicable to you might be higher because the goods that are in the basket, some of them might not be applicable to you. So you might find the goods that are in the basket, you know, they maybe have a less weight, whilst with you personally, the weight is bigger to you on your basket, you know. It is when we talk of maize meal, for example, you might not eat it, you know. So in your basket, it might be just a small portion. You might buy 1 kg, you might buy 50 kgs a month. So you might have more weight on it, whilst you have less weight on it. But the point that I want to zero in there is on land is the, firstly, let me say, I've seen reports about land in South Africa that say some of the beneficiaries that have got the land have went on to lease that land back to the guys that the government bought it from. And that on its own defeats the whole purpose of this transfer of ownership, you know. So
it's a question
but
of skills.
they shouldn't be allowed to do that. If they want the land, they must farm the land, they must produce from the land. If they don't do that, the government takes it away and gives it to the next guy that wants an opportunity.
No, my opinion is that it's more complicated, because then you've got to also look at the history of land, like you know, the 1913 Act of when land was taken from people. I agree with Rory to a certain extent, actually with both of them. What I think is that land expropriation, it's very crucial to the future of this country, and it must be managed properly, you know. If land is transferred, you know, part of the package must be skills also, because if you give me land but you don't give me the skills, you know, to produce from that land, then I'm not going to be a good steward of that land. That's the one thing. So in that respect, you know, I do agree that the land has to produce, because that's also safeguards food security in this country.
Yeah. Let me cut you there. I'm gonna have to park this discussion for now, for the sake of progress, because I want to link that discussion with Article 7 later on. You know. So for now, let's park it now, and agree it's about food security, it's about land, and so many other factors. Yeah? Okay. So we'll come back to this discussion later on. But we have all done some good work in terms of looking at the role of the South African government in terms of public goods, managing the economy in terms of those macro objectives, common resources, which is one of them is land that we've been talking about, very topical issue. Market failure, the goods that if left to the private sector will not have an incentive to produce. Things like defense, equity, distribution of income. This is where the Gini coefficient comes in to say it's a measure of how unequal societies are. And South Africa happens to be one of the most unequal societies. The role of government in terms of this is to make sure that a competitive environment exists in South Africa, regulate that environment, you know. And I think somebody raised an issue of those who have been found not to be doing that. The fines that they are given seems not to be deterrent enough, you know. Okay. Now let's move on to the balance of payments. I want us to discuss the balance of payments. In our discussions, remember in our discussions of things that we've discussed before, we have touched on the balance of payments, because from that fact of everything being linked together. So from our diagram that we had yesterday of the circular flow of income, what we are now discussing is the foreign sector. Remember that diagram, the circular flow? It's not there. The foreign sector. No, don't worry about it. It's fine. We had firms, we had households, we had government, we had banks, and then we said we also have the foreign sector. Okay. Then we had the goods, and then we had the factor market. Okay, so we want to zero in on this one now, the foreign sector. Okay, so each country then keeps a record of transactions that are happening here. Okay, what are we importing? What are we exporting? Okay, in your view, as a country, what should we import? Is there anything that will say we should import this and not import that? We should let everyone import whatever they want.
No, I don't think so.
Legislation for that.
Sorry?
That's what we discussed earlier.
Yeah, for instance, I think we spoke about it yesterday, the textile industry in South Africa. When we got a lot of Chinese clothes, which were of bad quality, imported into this country, sold everywhere.
Yeah, we touched on that yesterday.
Yeah, so I think it has to be regulated, because if you just let, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, if we should just let anybody import or if we should import everything. That was the question. Yeah, so I'm saying I don't think so, because I think it has to be regulated. Otherwise, you end up having what happened in South Africa with the textile industry, people losing jobs, firms closing because of a lot of Chinese imports.
Okay. But the moment now you put tariffs, the country where you are getting these goods might also retaliate in terms of South African goods. And then when they retaliate, you also retaliate. They retaliate, and the trade war now begins. You now find the movement of goods between countries then becomes difficult. And the other part is that the government actually signs free trade agreements with some of these countries. You know, they sign free trade agreements. So you'll find there will be a free trade agreement between South Africa and the EU. You see that?
Certain items there.
You've signed a free trade agreement, so goods move freely between the two. But what are you importing here? You are importing machinery, capitalistic goods. What are you exporting to them? Primary goods. So what will happen? You will always be paying more. Okay. So this record then of these transactions of exports and imports is the BOP.
Sorry, how would you be paying more?
Sorry?
Just go back to that. How would you be paying more?
Okay. What is happening is if you are importing your machinery from Britain, you will trade with Britain. You will pay Britain. You won't pay Britain South African rands. You pay what?
Pounds.
In US dollars, for example. Normally people trade internationally in the US dollar. With any other countries, So you pay US dollars, okay. Let's just use the US then. You buy your equipment. The price of that machine is 100 million. Okay. You are exporting your gold, which is unprocessed, to the US, and the US pays you 50. What is happening overall in terms of US dollars to South Africa? They are moving out. You are paying more than what you are receiving.
Okay.
You see. And that then is called the balance of trade. The balance of trade. So the balance of trade is within this balance of payment, but we are looking at exports and imports of goods and services. Okay? Remember, we are saying there you've got three accounts: the current account, the financial account, and the reserves. So within the current account, you look at exports of goods and services. That's your trade. How are we doing as a country? You see. If you run out of US dollars, how are you going to pay for oil? And if you don't pay Saudi Arabia for their oil, what will they do? They'll close their pipe. And then what happens to the South African economy?
Not good.
So let's look at this current account, because it's quite interesting in terms of South Africa. Turn to page 129. Turn to page 129. So if you look on page 129, because gold is very important to the South African economy, it actually has its own, actually recorded on its own to show what is happening to the gold in South Africa. Is it still important, or are we getting more income from other minerals? But this is what South Africa has been known for, top exporter of gold. Not processed gold. Okay. So what we have there, we have merchandise exports. So this is the export of goods. So we look at the total value of exports that have gone out of South Africa. Remember yesterday we also had this equation for GDP, and we said C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay? So this part is the balance of trade, because we are saying exports minus imports. So if you're exporting more, let's use numbers. Sometimes it's easier to use numbers. If we say consumers are spending 20, firms are spending 5, government is spending 5, and then your exports are 20 and your imports are 10, like this. What is the total? Let me borrow you calculators. I know you've got phones.
It's 40. 40, yeah.
Sorry. Okay. We are using a simplified. Okay. Plus x minus n. Okay. So we can say our GDP is. Oh, we said what? 20 plus 5 plus 5 plus 20 minus 10. So what's our GDP there? You said 40?
Yep.
40, right. Okay. Now, if we increase our exports, we export 40. So which means this part now becomes 40 minus 10. What is our GDP?
70.
70. When we divide our GDP by our population, our GDP per capita goes up. So our standards of living as a country has gone up, right? So what is happening now if we export more?
Our per capita is going to go up.
Our GDP is going up. You have something to say?
Sorry, she was
No, we're
asking
just
how
debating
did we
before
get to 70?
Yeah, how did you get there?
I'm
To
giving
70.
to
How did you?
30 plus 30.
Oh,
Yeah.
60.
14.
it's 60. That is 5, that is 30. It's 60.
Yeah.
That is 60, right? We had 40 there. We now have 60. So what are we seeing here? If we increase our exports, our GDP goes up. Okay. Now let us control our imports. Let's control our imports. Imports are now 5. Sorry, let's leave that as 20. Then we say 5. So our GDP becomes 45.
45.
Okay. So, what is the impact of this? You see it as a direct impact on our GDP. Whatever happens in the foreign sector will affect the GDP of the country. So this is what countries like China are doing. They concentrate on
Exports.
export. Let's export as much as we can. You know, even Japan, we are not going to throw anything away. If these cars are now, you know, what do they do to them? They recondition them and ship them to Africa. You know, Japan is a very small country, so they look and say, "Oh, what is the cost of destroying this thing within this small country of ours?" You know, to require quite a lot of resources. And what are we going to do with this? The best thing, they recondition these cars, ship them to Africa in their thousands.
Used cars.
Japanese used cars. Fortunately, they are not allowed in South Africa. You cannot drive them on the South African roads. What will happen to South Africa's GDP?
Unless with Lesotho registration.
Sorry?
Unless in Lesotho registration.
There's always a way, eh? There's always a
Or
way.
Swaziland registration.
And then what do you do now with when it's got Swaziland registration? Would you stay with it here for whatever?
As long as they're not tracing.
Okay, so you take it to Lesotho, you register it in Lesotho, and then you bring it back.
You sell it to South Africa.
And then you bring it back. Okay. Now let's continue with what we have there.
Is that the reason why now companies, the issue of exports and imports, why not companies, countries go to the extent of
If you look at the formula,
duties,
that
Okay.
export minus
balance of
import,
trade to balance the exports.
if you increase your exports,
I was saying is that part of the reason why
if you have more exports than
countries would
imports,
have go
So therefore it
into
means
trade agreements
you're minusing
so that they can balance their
the
exports
imports
and
from the
imports.
exports.
Well, they go into trade
So-
because to get what they don't have in the first instance. You see, you
Yes, an increase.
you trade with Saudi Arabia to get oil,
Increase your
right?
imports,
But
and
for Saudi
increase
Arabia,
your exports.
it is also about their
goes up.
GDP. They are getting rich as a country.
So you pro-
They sell more.
producing a lot out of a country. Okay, let me not put it that way, but what he says basically
Okay.
is if
But this is a simplified example, right?
you increase your exports, your GDP goes
Okay.
up.
It's a simplified example.
According to that formula. If
Or
you
you
look
can
at that formula.
maintain your exports, increase your imports.
And don't go decrease. Still go the GDP.
Okay. But now you will find, you will find now countries have signed with the World Trade Organization, right? So they've signed with the World Trade Organization to regulate this part now, this foreign sector. So what is happening is they sit and agree that as it actually started as a general agreement on tariffs before it was called WTO. So they sat and agreed, let's eliminate these tariffs within these countries. You know, let's eliminate them and facilitate free trade. So this is what the World Trade Organization is about. So if you are importing less, you always have, that's why you always hear the current account deficit in South Africa has increased to 6% of GDP. South Africa is importing more than what it is exporting. And it continues. And it continues, and continues. Okay. Now, in as much as we are saying to the world, let us agree on the trade tariffs, what does the US do? Now, if you look in terms of the cost dynamics, it will mean to you that Africa has got an advantage in terms of producing agricultural products, right? It's cheaper to produce agricultural products here than it is to produce them in the US. So, a basic trade theory will then say, then agricultural products should be produced in Africa and then exported to the US. But what does the US do? It subsidizes its local farmers. For every cow, 2 rand a day. So that way, their farming industry doesn't collapse. So it still exists. Then, there is no incentive now for African countries to export their products to the US. Then on the other hand, because you cannot produce machinery, you have to import it from the US. The same is true with the Eurozone. They also subsidize their farmers. You seem to be.
Yeah, I'm saying it's only in South Africa where there is no subsidy at all. Though before '94, there was actually, farmers were actually subsidized. In this new country, only the
Instead of
Gupta's farms.
Instead
were
of paying
subsidized.
grants,
Instead of paying grants.
instead of paying grants,
Child
maybe
support.
we should think about subsidizing farmers.
But you are seeing in Nigeria that subsidies are inefficient again. You know, they are an inefficient means of addressing production. Now let us look what we have here. On 129, we've got net gold exports. Sorry, we've got merchandise exports. These are your export of goods. Then it says net gold exports. Right? So you see gold has been removed from the other exports which are on top and shown separately to to highlight the importance of gold there within South Africa. You know. And then you subtract imports of goods. Then what you have is the trade balance. Okay. Then you add service receipts and income receipts. Then what you have then, after these income and service payments and receipts, you then have the current account balance. So you have goods and services. What are we exporting and what are we importing? Then it gives you the balance on the current account. Now, if you look in terms of that budget highlight handout, does it say anything on the current account?
Which project?
That one.
The current account deficit to average 6.2% over the next 3 years.
Over the next 3 years, right?
6.2.
6.2.
Okay. Now what you see here, you see on the budget, you are spending more than what you have. Then you come to the imports, you are also paying more than what we have. So what is happening to the overall debt position of South Africa?
It's getting inflated.
Keeps on going up and going up and going up and going up. Keeps on going up and going up.
And then we're going to be Greece.
Says we're going to be Greece. Now, so when we now come, let's come to the quickly to the financial account. The financial account on page 132, which now will bring in your investments into the country.
Sorry, can we just go back to that current account on page 130?
On page 130. Okay.
The less income payments that they're talking about, is it what are those type of payments would that be?
Well, you would have it could be immigrants' payments, those who are working here, and then their income they pay, they then send it out of South Africa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then you can also have South Africans outside who then send in their money in. Okay.
Okay, but how do you make if I'm paying money out to I'm from Zambia and I'm working here and I'm sending money back there, back home. I'm just trying to think, how does that become an income? Is it the
No,
money that you
becomes a
pay on sending that money out?
It's a payment.
How does it become an income?
Yeah.
Remember the
Maybe I'm just thinking I'm just
foreign
thinking in
exchange,
terms of
They may have to pay a tax or fee for that to happen.
the income.
Yep.
It becomes an income if it is coming to South Africa. It's a payment if money is going out of South Africa.
Yes.
Okay. So in this case,
So we
then
look
we're
at
talking
the
about
amount of
that's
money that
coming
you are
in.
sending. So the money that you are sending out becomes a payment. The one that is coming in, yeah.
I don't know. I'm still not.
Yeah.
I'm still lost because I'm trying to. I don't know if I understand.
Okay.
You are earning a salary as an income to you, but you are residing, in fact, you are from Zambia. That income is, in South African context, a payment to Zambia. So it's your income payment to Zambia. But if you were working in UK, that income it would be receipts to the South African context.
Oh, okay, okay. And then the current transfers.
You see. Just look on page 132 there, where it says
Explain low.
Says income payments are just the opposite, dividend and interest payments made by South Africans to foreigners who have investments in South Africa. Okay. So if you are a South African and you travel abroad, in this case, South African currency is leaving the country as service payment.
Yes.
You live here, you visit the US, you are taking money here.
The US.
Yeah. So money is flowing out of South Africa. If you're a tourist, you come in here, money is flowing in. Then from there you then add, which is the part now, which talks about investments, the financial account. Financial account talks about investments now. As a country, what is the net? So you have direct investments, portfolio investment, direct investment. When you really invest in South Africa, you could decide to come and open a factory here. Portfolio investment is through shares.
Okay.
Through shares. So either way, money would either come in or go out. Right? Sasol invested in the US. So money left South Africa to the US. But when South Africa's operations in the US are now profitable and Sasol sends its profits to South Africa, money is coming into the US.
Into South Africa.
Sorry, money is coming into South Africa. Yeah. So you net those two payments. So in everything you net what is coming out, what is coming in. Then what is the overall balance? Okay. The overall balance, which will be reflected now by the reserves account. So when you include the financial account now and the current account, then you have the balance of payments. Right? But you'll see there is quite a lot of emphasis on the current account. You will hear it is 6% of the current account deficit is 6% of GDP. You will not hear that the deficit is 6%, the balance of payments deficit is 6% of GDP, but it will always be the current account. Why so much emphasis on the current account?
Exports and imports.
Of goods and services.
Oh, sorry? Goods and services.
Yeah, exports. But that doesn't mean that that investment is not, they are not important. But investment is something that is long term. Yeah. Investments are something that are normally long term. Now let's look at the South African position as in 135. Now this takes from what we were talking about, what we have seen from the budget. It explains the scenario pre-94. What was prevailing then? Okay. If you look on the paragraph somewhere here, amount outstanding in foreign debt in 1985 was 23 billion US dollars. Now, how much was that? Think of 23 billion in 1985. That was a lot of money. 23 billion now. Now, yesterday we looked at, what did you say? We said Zim's GDP is 11 billion. So, South Africa in 1985 owed 23 billion. So, which is more than twice the output of Zimbabwe for the whole year. And the problem now with that, it says most of that amount was short-term debt. Short-term debt is normally the repayment is how long? What's a short-term debt? From finance, from accounts?
5 years.
Within 12 months.
short-term debt is within 12 months.
Yes.
Short-term debt
Seems
is
like
within 12 months.
really tight.
So what happens if you pay out, imagine 23 billion within a year, out?
It's a lot of money.
Yes.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So this is, because if you pay that amount, it still comes back to demand and supply. For you to pay 23 billion, if demand increases, what happens to the price?
Goes up.
It's up there.
This is price, this is quantity. So the price will increase from 10 to the US dollar to 15. Demand has increased. Price goes up. The price goes up. So if you pay 23 billion just like that, so what happens to the rand? It will collapse.
Just a quick question there. If you look at the exchange rate in the 80s between the rand and the US dollar, it was actually quite good compared to now. And my question, when I say it was actually quite good, I think I'm just gonna give example, but I know it was, maybe it would be it would range between, say,
90 to 100.
pardon?
90 to 100 or so. A rand then was value more than a dollar.
Yeah, it was very good. So my question then is, because of the strength of the rand compared to the dollar at that time, what would this 23, the impact that paying this short-term debt, how would that then impact the outflow of money in the economy because of the strength of the rand?
Okay. What happens is, in terms of demand and supply, if you are suddenly now going to pay that amount, you have increased demand by that amount for US dollars. You see. So you have the demand for US dollars increases in the country against supply. So if you have to pay it now, suddenly there is an increase in demand for 23 billion.
Dollars.
Yes. And an increase in demand without a change in supply, then the rand takes a dive, depreciates.
Okay.
So it when the rand is good, when the rand is strong, it is good, it is bad.
But that's economics, like you said. If you want one answer, then you must cut one arm.
It is good for the importer, because if the rand is 8, assume you are buying something from the US and it's $1. So it means you pay how much? 8. If the rand depreciates to 15, the same product, you are now paying 15. So for you, when you're importing, it is something else. But for you, when you're exporting, it is good. It is good, because now your US customer is going to pay you 15 rand for the same product. You see. Yeah. I think we can take a break from here.